the common situations that create problems for those of us with ADHD have to do with the chaos and the stress that parents are under nowadays. One thing I've done research on is that, two parents are working, there's more single parent households. The hours people are working at their jobs have increased tremendously, commutes have increased, and parent responsibilities have increased. And so one of the things that causes this sort of perfect storm for us as parents with ADHD is that there's a lot of details to follow up on. I have an entire email account dedicated to all the emails the schools are sending, and you could spend all your time going through and figuring out all these nuances. A lot of these tasks require good planning and executive function. And by executive function, I mean the management system of the brain that allows us to plan, prioritize, pay attention, self-regulate, all the things that challenge us. All the myriad household requirements, right? So we don't just have to schlep people to sports and go to a job. We have to also manage the house, food shopping, sports equipment, lunches. And, one of the things that has been proven, and if you've taken any of the CHAD parent to parent courses, I'll never forget this, is that a lot of, when we have children with ADHD, there is much more required in terms of supporting that child, but also managing these multiple emails from teachers, tutors, coaches, and it affects us. It affects our job, it affects our livelihood. So it's really it's a key aspect of this that I want to stress. One of the things I always say to parents is, if you are raising a child with ADHD, you have certain things that are more challenging, and you need to cut yourself some slack and allow yourself that space to do whatever you need to do in order to manage things. And maybe your friends don't live that way, that's fine. Because, my big example is that I will never buy a head of lettuce, because what happens with a head of lettuce in my house is that it dies in the drawer. No one ever chops it up. No one ever washes it. I live next to a farm stand. It's criminal. But if I buy lettuce that's already in one of those bags, I use it. So that's just my example of, I'm sure some people are like, why are you buying bags of lettuce? You know why? Because it's better. It gets used. And that's the kind of mindset I think we have to adopt. One of the things that is really challenging for those of us with ADHD goes back to the executive functions, and that is future thinking. And future thinking is all driven by the executive functions and by a skill called metacognition. So metacognition is to take a bird's eye view of a situation, to have a realistic assessment of your skills and abilities. So, our kids don't always have realistic assessments. To take information from past learnings and incorporate it in your future thinking. And one of the things that Barkley is saying here is, if you have no sense of the future, if you have no sense of time, then you're not going to make a choice. You're not necessarily thinking about self-regulation because you didn't know there was a need for it. So you're not necessarily failing to self-regulate on an issue or failing to complete a task because you maybe didn't even think about the fact that in the future, this task or this situation will be necessary. And those of us who are parenting with ADHD, we're trying to struggle and manage that sense of future and that sense of time in ourselves, and then in our loved ones and those living in our family. So that's a huge component here, and you can learn future thinking. It is absolutely something that can be taught. So I want to say that because I think it's something we don't talk about enough, and I definitely think it's something that could improve all of our lives. Future thinking is driven by this piece of the brain in nonverbal and verbal working memory. So that means your ability to hold information is working memory, your ability to manipulate information. And nonverbal working memory is the images you see in your head, and verbal working memory is your self-talk. right? So when you think about the future, there's something that we often do, and we talk about it a lot in sports, and it's called mimetic ideational information processing. And what that really means is visualizing yourself in the future, right? So you do a little mind mime, you do a little pre-rehearsal in your mind. Do you ever do this where you look at the future and you think, okay, I want to attend this webinar, but here's what I have to do before the webinar. Okay, I need to make sure that my dog's put away, that my daughter's on her homework, that the people who are putting a closet in my basement, know that I'm going up there. I put a little sign on the door saying that, don't ring the bell, and I have to think about all that. So what happens with many of us is that we just don't pause to pay attention to this. But every human being has this capacity to have this reflection and see yourself, a little movie in your mind, actually doing a task in the future. And you might do that, and you might find that your child does not. Well, one of the reasons as ADHD kids, we go upstairs to get our socks, and we come back down and we don't have our socks, and everybody wonders, why didn't you get the socks? Is that a lot of times kids don't do this mind mime function. Sarah Ward is an executive function coach, and she talks a lot about this and has some great tools. And so one of the things I always ask kids is, when you think about the future, do you do this? And a lot of times they do it for sports, or they do it for an area of interest, or they do it for video games, but they don't do it in daily life. So that's great. Now we know they can do it, and we can stress to them the importance, and to ourselves. Part of this is realizing and thinking about the future and training yourself to. And part of it is just pausing to picture that future self engaged in this task. And the impact of that is so profound, because you will have the ability then, instead of things sort of come crashing down upon you, you would have the ability to picture what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. I'm going to pack the lunches. I'm going to complete my to-do list. I'm going to clean up the kitchen. And I picture myself, a little movie in my mind, doing all of this stuff, which means that not as much as a surprise, right? Because I've done this pre-rehearsal and I've adjusted my timeline, right? I've adjusted my picture to say, okay, well, how long will that take and what will it look like? So this is just a little snippet about this. And like I've mentioned, there's many presentations about this that you can attend, and you can really build this piece, but it's essential. And one of the reasons our kids are not grabbing their socks, grabbing their soccer equipment, forgetting their computer, and you have to drive it to school, is because they're not doing this mind mime. It also, by the way, affects social. So if you think about it, you need to go into the cafeteria, you need to think about who you'll sit with, what you'll say, how to join in a group. And that's something that a lot of kids struggle with because they have not done that mind mime. So it's called mimetic ideational information processing. It's pre-planning, simulating events, doing a mental dress rehearsal. I call it the movie in your mind. It's this mental trial and error, right? So you're doing this acting out of scenarios, but in your head. And you can actually experience the emotions based on this future simulation. You can get stressed, you can get interested, you can think about things and think about what's going to happen. And a lot of it is about pausing and allowing yourself this pre-planning time. And so with a lot of my clients, what I always say is pick a time when you're going to do this for tomorrow and for the week ahead. And it really works. It's literally, I would say for myself, changed my life. Often people with ADHD don't do this pre-imagining. They don't do this mental dress rehearsal. So when your kid is going upstairs to get their socks and their sports equipment or whatever, one of the things you can ask them is, what will it look like? So what will it look like when you go upstairs? What will you do? What will it feel like? And you can sort of prompt them to to start to do this mental dress rehearsal. Or you can even say, let's do this together. Let's do this visualization. When people in sports and stuff talk about visualization, this is what they're talking about. And it's pretty fabulous. It can really help you with that problem that Barkley highlights, which is the future thinking. So one of the things that I think as a person with ADHD running a house is that we have these aspects that cause chaos, right? We have these things that cause us to have constant problems. You know, we have these areas of chaos, like the picture of my client's front hall that I mentioned, or areas of the day even that cause chaos. And so something I've been using for a long time, and I use it in my own life, is over the week, what household situations cause the most chaos and cause the most stress, and just to make a list. And, you know, if you change just that one aspect, what would happen for your entire household? So I'll give you a personal example. I order groceries, they get delivered, because groceries are something that get left off and people don't go, and I don't go, or somebody doesn't get there, or we miss the wrong things. And that way it causes all kinds of a ripple effect, right? It's like this domino effect that continues to flow. So the idea here is that you look at the situations. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, my morning routine with my child is the thing that causes the biggest stressors in our house. Well, here's the thing, we can only control ourselves, but when you're having conversations, when you're looking at what we can work on for this fall, maybe you work on or look at those aspects and ask your child, what does it feel like for them? You know, what is it stressful for them? Because often it is not something that they have paused and thought about, or they think it's just fine. So as much as you can keep your cool and just say, you know, what do they feel about it, and kind of hear from them, and also go with a collaborative tone. I would love to work on this. This really affects me. So this sheet is just the idea of trying to figure out what causes the chaos, what are the juggernauts, what cause big stressors, and what are the things we can work on that would have a positive impact on our household. You know, is it shouting too much? Is it, you know, nobody really gets up on time? Whatever it is, just jot it down, and that way you kind of have a very clear picture of it, and then you can work collaboratively together and get whatever supports you need, because we need supports for sure. And need somebody to help us out. And I think there's no shame in that. The more services and supports you can get, the better.